The purpose of this video is to focus on training for basically process engineers, validation engineers, and even automation engineers when they're coming in to use DeltaV basically for the first time. With DeltaV, the main reason that it's used, it's generally the whole idea of the batch executive is kind of what people want to kind of zone in on. They want to kind of have a piece of equipment where you have an operator. The operator uses something called the batch operator interface, and then they're looking at the actual screen in the background as well. And essentially, they're able to then, just use the system kind of in a simplistic, basic manner. So when many kind of process engineers and say validation people get into kind of like DCS validation and so on. They might go off and take a look, say, for example, let's say certain, maybe a GAMP guidebook. There's one specifically here for process control systems. And here, say, for example, you'll find an example of a diagram inside where you're basically looking at something where you basically look at this recipes, you know what I mean? This thing called unit procedure, phases, equipment modules, all that kind of stuff, right? And it overwhelms people to a very, very large extent because they're kind of looking at something, they don't know how to translate the logic of something that they see into something kind of more meaningful. Like, people are used to seeing something like, say, you have, say, some kind of a P&ID with a CIP system, and they might be able to look at it and see how it works. But as soon as they hear about this area called the DeltaV Explorer, basically they're not familiar, you know what I mean, with what's going on. And you can kind of talk at length to someone, but it's just like, say, children in an underage sport like football. If you do too much talking, the people switch off, and they can't take in basically too much at once. So what I want to zone in on is, say, out of the box, there is a project called the Paint Project inside DeltaV, and this is used kind of as a training system for people. And I feel myself that if someone goes down this road where they actually assess the Paint Project at the very, very start, it's too much. It just simply is. And for myself, for developing a training system, what I did was I broke it basically in three steps. So what I did was I went off and focused on a highly simple system. Then I went for a system that was kind of in the middle, and then basically I went for a full facility. And I think that when you're using, say, the Paint Project here, there is the kind of this DeltaV kind of help menu in the background, and it goes through everything. And the problem is that if you're looking at this for the very first time, your mind is blown, and that is as simple as that. From a validation point of view, anyone who's involved in validation, there's a greater emphasis, more and more and more and more, to be able to use a system that you can't just simply sit kind of in the background. And it's kind of gone away. That went away for a period of time where you could stay at a distance, and now you're being pulled right back in, and that's effectively it. So if you try to go off and use the out of the box system that's there, my opinion is you're going to end up in a kind of a huge issue. So for automation people, I think that when you actually come in here at the very, very start, say, for example, say, for example, I have a PLC, this is a Siemens, and say, for example, I have, say, just it's a function called caustic wash, and basically it's meant for kind of like a CIP system. What you're used to is being able to put all of the software condensed. So say, for example, here I have effectively, I can go down through an entire sequence, and basically I'm referring to a lot, and I'm going step by step by step by step by step. And essentially, DeltaV does work with structured text, but it breaks it out in a highly modular way. So I think for the very, very start with people, what I have basically done is I've created this area just basically called the water buffer treatment area, right? And essentially, I have created a highly simplified system where it's literally just one tank, and it's an open valve, and then a closed valve. And then basically what we have is a level sensor essentially in the middle. And the whole idea of this system is simply to get people familiar with where to go within the DeltaV Explorer, and then also to use the batch operator interface as well. So I'll give a kind of a quick explanation of essentially the areas to look at inside the batch operator interface, or sorry, within the DeltaV Explorer. Then what I'll do is I'll execute the program, and then this video will accompany then a much more detailed blog on how to create basically this simple system from the very start. Okay, so at the very beginning, the first thing to take in is that we have control modules, and what I've done is I've created 3 different control modules. And essentially these, I'll open these up in just a moment. These are kind of like instances. They put down the defining rules for various instruments. Here I have one for a motor, then I have level indicator, and then basically I have 2 normally closing valves. Okay, so then essentially what I have next, and this is probably the most important thing, is that essentially I have these phases. Right, and this is kind of where the software logic goes. And if I open this up, essentially you have what's called the states. And essentially most of the time we're interested in running. So basically what I'm doing is I'm doing something highly simplified. Right, in the background, all I'm going to do for the example is fill a tank with a set amount of water. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to drain the tank. And if you go inside here, what you'll basically see is that in a sequential function chart, as it is, effectively what we have is small bodies of logic which are placed inside each of these individual steps, and then we have a transition, and that's effectively it. So we have an actual transition that's making sure that, say for example, we can't go further or not, right? And essentially that means that the code is broken out very long-winded. It is not in the same way as kind of what I showed there a moment ago, where we can have lots of it kind of put in together. Again, it's extremely broken out, but that is effectively kind of how things are done. Now essentially what we have are areas which are created where we can combine our phases, and then we can combine our modules. Right, so that effectively means that we have a type of valve. So these guys here, where we see both of these XV valves, these are copies of this valve here, for example, but the rules apply to these instances down here as they're basically defined. Right, so that means that all of the rules and all of the settings in the backgrounds apply to these particular valves, and that's kind of essentially it. Right, and then what we've done is we've created a piece of equipment, right, and we've basically associated everything with them. So when someone is looking at, say, ISA88 for the first time, or ISA95 and so on, again, it can be completely overwhelming. But essentially what you will see over and over is this whole idea of equipment module, control module, phase, and then you move up into something that becomes very confusing. You move into something called an operation, and then you have essentially a unit operation, and then you have a procedure. Trying to get this explained to someone is very difficult. The only way that you can really take it in my view, is to actually watch it effectively in real time. So the best way to kind of to look at these items is to effectively say, look, what we have is we have a sequence of events, right, and we're going to break it down, and essentially what we're going to do is we're going to put formulas there in place, or we're going to put actual process parameters. In the example that I have myself, all I have is basically one process parameter. All I have is fill amount, it's called. Right, so what I'll do is I'm just going to go into the batch operator interface, and I'm going to run this in real time, and I'm going to watch the actual screen. Okay, so here I have the batch operator interface, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new batch. I'm going to pick this this procedure here, right? And there's one item that I have to do. I have to pick a piece of equipment, okay? And then what I have to do is I have to put in how much I actually want. Okay, so all I want is 100 liters of water. That's all, kind of nothing more than that. So I'm going to create my batch, and he's ready to go. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to play him. I'll just put in a comment of test, and essentially I'll just go okay. So what I'm going to see then here in the background is I'm going to see that essentially my fill is running, right? And the fill is going to stay open until such a time whereby essentially a level sensor goes beyond a certain limit. Okay, so you can see that he's open there right now. And what I'm going to do then is I'm going to go off and I'm going to go to this level 700 right here. Okay, so I'm going to go into him, and essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to open him live. Okay, so this is to substitute for feedback from an actual live system. So I'm going to open him there. I'm going to open online as the important one. And here I'm going to put in 101. So I'll just say that we're after filling there. So that's done in real time. And I can see that there's an actual process value that is going to update. Okay, so I can see that this has gone up right here. And then I can see that the item has closed. Okay, and basically what's going to happen now, if I go back to the batch operator interface, I'm going to see that now we are running the drain phase. Okay, so I can take a look at him. And what that essentially means is inside drain, there's a small body of code which will be there in the blog, essentially saying that we open this particular valve and we open it until the actual level sensor has gone very, very low. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll go back in. I'm going to open that level indicator, and I am going to open him online. I'm going to go back here, and basically what I'm going to do is give him a value of 1, just something very, very small. And essentially when he's gone down to an extremely low limit, then what I'm going to see is that this guy then has closed. Okay, and when I go back to my to the batch operator interface, what I'll see is that he has run and he has been complete. So essentially the whole idea here of a sequence like this is that we can show in real time, right, something very, very simple working. And I think that that's the best strategy, that even when it comes down to communication with an MES system or something else, that it should be broken down into small little pieces that could be digested. That it's my own view anyway, that if you start off with something that is too complicated, such as, in my opinion, the paint project is brilliant, but if you do too much at once for people, they won't really get up to speed. So I want the project, basically the series of beginning projects, to be downloadable, and essentially just so people can kind of, you know what I mean, get that confidence that they need at the very beginning. Thank you very much.